Yes, hello. In fact, last week we had a glance at the stats for the biggest economies in the EU. Unfortunately, the results were pretty appalling. These countries are not the place to go to get a better deal, either in real estate or indeed in lifestyle. Let's do a rundown on several topics and have a look at these things in more detail. Let's start with the language and the culture, which of course, once one gets out of the UK, we do have a bit of a problem with the language. France, for example, has a very high taxation system, and the French do not like the Brits. To settle down and survive, you'd need to be a fluent French speaker. My partner, Julie, spoke French like a native, so she was quite at home in France. It wasn't just the language, but the inherent understanding of the culture. The way she insulted officials she didn't like. The way she bossed the men around. It was all pure French. There is more of a problem with Spain. You can hide in the tourist ghettos, but I think that destroys the point of going to Spain. And the country is irritatingly parochial. And if you're a Brit, obviously you carry an extra ration of parochialness, which sets you out for exclusion. Back in the very old days when I walked around Spain, the parochialness was fierce, but tinged with fear. I was in a difficult situation because I spoke Castilian, which was the government language, a language of Madrid, and that made people suspicious of me. I was okay when they discovered I was English. I'm not sure how things stand these days, but then the regions still do have their own way of speaking, and it isn't always obvious to those who learn Spanish at school. In Italy, you'll find fewer people speaking English because, as the locals say, the English teachers are so bad. In Northern Europe, you're not going to have a problem. But if you stray further east, then things get increasingly difficult, especially as you move towards Russian, where it is not just the language which changes, but the alphabet as well. Do remember that once you cross into Bulgaria or Romania, you're going to have to start transliterating the road signs. Okay, so much for language, but let's check the economic figures. Remember, the three largest countries managed to average about 0.7% growth last year. That's pathetic. Economies in the Eurozone are stagnating, and every year their share of the global economic pie gets smaller. It is certainly not the place to be, economically speaking. What that has to mean also is that house prices are either too high or they're about to fall. That also goes for the currency. It is far too high for the comfort of most of the countries using the euro. Please also note that as more countries leave, which they will, the use requirement for the currency will fall, which will lead to a fall in value. However, the real problem with an economic valuation is what might be called the sting in the tail. Let's look at a high-profile problematic country within the bloc, Italy. The country's economic achievements this century has left its economy pretty much where it was at the beginning of the century. On the other hand, is that somewhere you want to invest in by buying land? I would think not. But what about that sting in the tail? Suppose Italy does leave the EU. Of course, it may not, but the odds are that it will. If it does, it would no longer be able to use the euro. The one important economic factor for the country is to abandon the euro, which is dragging its economy down. That means it will go back to a new lira, and that will mean a devaluation. If it's less than 40%, I should be much surprised. That would put a buy in Italy right now as a darn silly move. Wait for the divorce, followed by the devaluation, and then buy. That scenario goes for rather a lot of the countries in the EU at the moment. It would include France. I think a devaluation there is likely to be 10% or less. Spain and Portugal could be anywhere from devaluation of 25% to 40%. And who knows what else is likely to come along and kick a country when it's down. Have a look at a notice in El País in Spain. January destroys 218,953 jobs, and unemployment rises by 76,216 people in the middle of the third wave of the virus. I'm surprised it's not more than that, but all is not well. Let's turn to Ireland. Another bunch of unhappy bunnies. Brussels is really making life in the EU hard for just about everyone. Maybe the political end game is to cause a monumental burnout. Certainly, the current efforts in this by the mandarins in Brussels seem to be set towards destroying the whole edifice. There is an alternative, but it comes to the same end point. I did mention in a blog way back that maybe we're looking at things the wrong way round. Should we be thinking of this from a German point of view? Recently, the German MP and EU lawyer Gunnar Beck had this to say, and I'm quoting, "The prime candidates for leaving the EU are Finland over the euro. Denmark has been rather aloof and doesn't agree with many policies such as migration, and it's not even part of the euro. The Netherlands is also rather discontent with the large subsidies for the eurozone. These are the most obvious. I can't see Italy or southern European countries leaving, at least until they get their share of German money." End of quotation. That is, of course, if they do get the money. Now let me repeat a quotation I made some time back from a 2018 debate at the Oxford Union by former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. Here's what he says about the breakup of the Union. Quote, "The way it will happen is that Germany will leave the euro once the Berlin political class has had enough. The moment they start sniffing in the wind that possibility that might have to bail out 2.7 trillion euros of Italian debt, believe you me, the Bundesbank has already a plan in the drawer for printing Deutschmarks." End of quote. Mr. Varoufakis then explained what will happen after, is that all German accounts will be redenominated from euros to Deutschmarks immediately, as Germany has what he calls a gigantic account surplus. Back to a quotation. "There are about 200 billion in the last 18 months that have shifted from Italian to German bank accounts because of the risk of keeping your euros in a country that after the breakup of the eurozone will see its currency redenominated downwards, certainly not outwards." End quote. And there you get, over the course of a convenient weekend, the collapse of the euro, or the currencies of the less successful remaining members. And that will lead to the collapse in the monetary value of any real estate and bank accounts in any of those countries. Obviously, this isn't going to happen overnight. We may well have another couple of years before things get really scary. But once one domino falls, the rest will follow extremely quickly. At the moment, the EU is a slow-motion train wreck. It will get extremely nasty once that wreck speeds up. I sincerely believe that buying into the EU now is about the stupidest move possible. Okay. There's more to the EU than what we've just looked at, but I'll go into that next week. See you then. Meanwhile, please do click the buttons down below to like this blog, which will help me a bit in getting more viewers. And see you next week.